Washington Journal continues.
We've always wanted to get Wes Pruden and Christopher Hitchens together, one from the right, one from the left. Had no idea they would come together at this particular moment. We might find an interesting result. So we'll start with you, Mr. Hitchens, and look at the front page of the Washington Times. The nuns admit shredding evidence is the lead story up here, but the continuing story of the week down here is royal family brings grief into public eye after much criticism. You've been on the telly, as they say, talking about this. What's your take at this point in the story?
If the top headline had referred to Mother Teresa's, it would have been the perfect front page from my point of view. As it is, two of my least favorite forces, that's to say the lovers of Princess Diana and the lovers of the House of Windsor, are having a fight, so it couldn't be better. I wish that's how it had been reported. Only today did the thing begin to talk of a news story. I mean, in other words, something that could actually be reported. For the whole of the rest of this week, we've been absolutely just drowning in drool, where the coverage has not been the coverage, objective coverage of an event, but the sort of forced recruitment of everybody into the same emotional mold. A great titanic outpouring of kitsch, in other words, where everyone is told that they're all part of a great we, and that this great we feels both bound together and enormously moved and hurt by something that actually is a non-event.
Howard Kurtz, who writes for your competitor here in the Capitol, the Washington Post, has a story on Media Notes Extra. Read all about it. Over-coverage shocks press.
Well, the press is probably easily shocked. Look, this has been one great Oprah Winfrey show this week, worldwide. And I have to say, as an Anglophile, that I'm really quite disappointed in Britain, where the tradition of the stiff upper lip has descended into, you know, something like this comes up and everybody in London seems to want to get on the Oprah Winfrey show too.
Street therapy, yeah.
Exactly. Look, let me say first of all that I was sad too when I heard the news that Diana was dead. She was a lovely, beautiful woman. What's also very interesting about this is that she was, what we've had a demonstration of this week is how sad everybody is when a beautiful woman dies like this. If she had been Mother Teresa, say, who really has accomplished something and has done something for the world, there would have been much outpouring of this. But because she is so beautiful, you know, people responded in a different way. I was enraged the first night because, enraged may be too strong a word, but the first coverage was the paparazzi chased them to their death. Now, I make no defense of the paparazzi. There are people who are unfeeling and unsentimental and all that. But here was a man who was, even if he was stone cold sober, he was driving in a suicidal manner at 100 miles an hour or whatever in a tunnel, absolutely asking for an accident. Where was Doty? He, you know, supposed to be so greatly in love with this woman. Why didn't he just lean forward and say, hey, for God's sake, slow down? I think any man owes that responsibility to any woman that he has in his care.
Let me just throw this in. There's a column in the New Republic, the new issue coming out today, The Feast of Diana by William Powers. This is the New Republic. And it's just one little paragraph here. He says, Katharine Graham, who publishes the Washington Post and Newsweek, announced that the paparazzi are not, in fact, members of the press. Informed of Mrs. Graham's remark, a paparazzo on another show pointed out that a perusal of Newsweek's pages would surely turn up fine examples of his profession's handiwork.
Yes, I saw Mrs. Graham say that, and I rather flinched because it was all part of the appalling self-flagellation and masochism of the profession this week. The fact is, there's a sinister side to this mass hysteria and mass sentimentality. It's not just what I was describing it as, sickly and drooling. It can be mean too, because it has a search for blame, which is part of the search for meaning in an essentially meaningless event. People want to be able to attribute responsibility. Now, if Princess Diana had trodden on a landmine, which I think would have been a very fine way for her to go, then we could say that in a sense her life and death had some meaning. As it happened, she was killed in a sordid traffic accident with a very sordid set of people, the international white trash jet set, into which she hoped to marry. Because no one wants to say that, because obviously the responsibility, as you say, is that of the driver. I mean, a driver going fast enough to get the Mercedes radiator into the front seat of the car. Picture the damage there. You know. But we can't say that it was the fault of her, the set she was running with, because that's not this week's story. It doesn't make her magical, it doesn't make her beautiful, it doesn't make her romantic.
Ask Wes Pruden
As
about
a result, the whole thing has been a wild goose chase. There are 7 members of my profession who would not be in jail if it wasn't for this ridiculous hysteria. I mean, the French police are simply scapegoating photographers.
But they're out now.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
But
the charges are still quite severe against them.
You had this piece in your Wednesday paper. Children hooked on TV stimulus find school. Bring this story up. One of your own reporters reported this. Passive action destroys. The press has pretty well taken on the television medium. Can you blame an outfit like MS rocketed from 20,000 to 1 million on Saturday night or whatever for seeing that this is a great story for their future?
Do I blame them?
Would you?
Would I have done it? I like to think I would not have, but then I'm not in television news. I did on TV news a long time ago. It's because I preferred the more serious print. It's perfectly understandable why they do it, given the way television news is. But it is, you know, I guess it was Richard Nixon who once said that television is to news what a bumper sticker is to philosophy. It's all built on sensation, it's all built on image, and that's what I meant by the Oprah Winfrey-ification of news this week. All television news wants now is, as the Wall Street Journal says, cheap sentiment and plus. Give people just nothing but sentiment, and let the facts be damned.
Well, are we sure those ratings are holding up, by the way? I mean,
probably
maybe I move in the wrong circles, but I don't. I mean, I walk around Washington a lot. I don't see people in tears or queuing up at the British Embassy or any of this kind of thing. Have you been to the British Embassy? I did go. Yes, I saw some people who obviously in need of some kind of there. But if I saw this guy, he's a boy, about 25, slightly overweight, putting down his flowers, his cards, and so on. They stopped him, asked him, you know, what did she mean to you? And he said, she was my role model, my very strong role model. Now, the cameraman, the interviewer, instead of saying, what do you mean role? What do you mean model? What are you talking about? Just nodded sympathetically and understandingly as if, yes, of course, that's just how we all feel. What is this? What? It's like living in a one-party state, a banana republic, when the dear leader dies. You're compelled, you're counted in. Now, as a matter of fact, everywhere else I've been in Washington this week, people have been completely dry-eyed. So I'm sure that everyone wants to be treated in this way, as a cretin, in other words, by the mass media. It's one thing to cover it. It's another to be part of the story and assume that we're all extras in it.
In about 5 minutes, we'll go to the calls, and we have some calls to suggest that their folks don't think the way you all do at this table, so we'll look forward to hearing, or even to our raising the questions. But let me show you an editorial that's probably the strongest. There have been a bunch this week. You had one times. This is in the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, and I wanted to read just a little bit of it to show you how strong the animus is toward the television business from the print side. Is it possible that there is any more normal person out there who by now is not grossed out and sickened by television's coverage of Princess Diana's death? It is remarkable to see a professional mindset that studiously reports the sins of the tabloids and the paparazzi, even as it shoves its own sump pumps deep into Lady Diana and runs the open hoses onto the nation's living room floors. Yes, this is in every sense of the word, and surely a major news event by whatever standards currently apply. So it is no surprise that the venerable CBS program 60 Minutes would devote its entire hour to the subject. But you knew that you had stumbled into a world unique to television when the program ended with Dan Rather reciting a eulogy that rose rapidly into the ethers, his voice breaking, eyes welling, and promising more direct London the next night. Perhaps the event's most unintended moment of apotheosis, in which all the moons and age of celebrity came into perfect alignment, occurred on ABC's venerable Sunday morning from which David Brinkley had the good fortune to retire before this moment arrived, when Sam Donaldson himself announced that Barbara Walters would deliver her thoughts, quote, from Southampton, unquote. In Southampton, Miss Walters appeared to in a study, its wall lined with books, causing an observer of our acquaintance in one American living room to remark, "It's fake." To be sure, it's all quite obviously fake, though the grim deaths in a tunnel and the sympathy they evoke are all too real. Normal human sympathy for the misfortune of others is not a complex human emotion, as at a wake or in a personal phone call, as a simple, direct expression of concern and support. The hard part is in knowing when to give what one can and when to expect to pull back. Let me just stop there and get your response.
Well, that's, you know, I could have written that, because he certainly expresses my sentiments. Look, what we had from the very beginning, the coverage was everybody wanting to get a piece of Diana. Like the young man at the British Embassy said she was a role model. We had John Travolta saying, I want that family to for those kids. I'll stop whatever I'm doing and fly over on a moment's notice. I suppose, you know, he thinks maybe this week they'd like to have been disco dancing. Tom Cruise was talking about, I've been in that tunnel. I've been chased by paparazzi in that tunnel. Had a lot of people who maybe saw Diana drive down the street in a limousine trying to say, you know, great friends with her, because everybody wanted to somehow get in on this Oprah Winfrey free-for-all.
Festival of absolute solipsism, exactly. And
Here's the Economist magazine cover just came in, The Tragedy of Diana.
Yeah, and everyone calling her very sinister when this vicarious identification goes so far. You were even doing it yourself, Mr. Pruden, as using the celebrity's first. Next it'll be OJ or Ollie. You start using their nicknames. You know, it's very creepy, I find. I don't, because although I actually did meet her twice, and I know her brothers, I don't know her well enough to call her by her first name. I don't call her Princess Diana because I'm not a royalist. I call her Diana Spencer, or the Spencer Girl, which I think is respectful enough, but I tried it on NBC this week, and I nearly got blown out of my chair with people, all of whom, it was as if, you know, they were her brothers, and her family honor had been insulted. So, there's only one line I'd change in the editorial, and this is the last time I'll ever say a sentence like that. And they're wrong in saying it's a tragedy in every sense of the word. It's not a tragedy in the original or Greek sense of the word. It isn't. There's no tension or tragic irony of action involved in this at all. It's a nasty traffic accident in the jet set.
In your times, Queen of Local Hearts, here's some local coverage. This is Mrs. Dole there, and you've got Diana at the Reagan White House in 1985 right here, and down below that is Ralph Lauren at the Hyde Center for Breast Cancer Research here in town.
Well, look, we're culpable, I admit it. We tried to pull back coverage a little bit in midweek, and it's, you know, we're succumbed to the same temptation that the networks did, although I like to think that we didn't give ourselves totally to the Princess Diana or the Miss Spencer story. Mourning, we do have what I think is the most important story of the day at the top of the page, and that is the nuns admit shredding of the evidence of the Al Gore fundraiser. Notice neither the Washington Post nor the New York Times could find room above the fold for that story. I happen to think that's the most important story of the day.
You read on it yesterday, too.
Yes, we did.
On the Justice Department having to reconsider, even in spite of the fact that there's no head of the Justice Department at the moment, it seems. There's no one in charge there. Which is a scandal in itself. I must say, I think the Washington Times has been very good in attention on the Thompson hearings. And
let me just ask you one last question on the hearings. We talked about this earlier, and I asked you first because you're over on the left side of the spectrum. The New York Times has an editorial more about Mr. Gore, and this morning they say, despite Mr. Gore's famous comment that no controlling legal authority restricted his action, he appears to have broken the law. What does that mean that the New York Times would say something like that in one of their editorials?
I think the word is finally, or at last. It seems to have dawned on them. I mean, up until now, the whole thing's been written up in a very euphemistic manner, and most of the press actually said all the most they could find to say about the Thompson hearings when they began was no smoking gun, which is a moronic thing to say when actually great disclosures are being brought to us about how the last election, if anyone remembers that sordid event, was bought and paid for.
What is your take? I mean, to take off your conservative hat for a moment, why is the New York Times doing this? What do you think is going on inside their editorial room?
Well, I think they don't want to be caught with their pants down as this story begins to unfold. Obviously, something is going on here, and as newspaper editors, they know they can recognize a story when it's coming down the pike at them. And as Mr. Hitchens says, finally, and the editorial page of the New York Times has always been a little ahead of the news department in this whole Clinton scandal factory down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So I think that's probably what's driving it.
And there is, like you, a Southerner that runs that page, Mr. Raines. Does that have anything to do with this?
Well, as somebody once said, Southerners, Jews, and Irish make the best newspaper, man. The Southerners for the love of the language, the Irish for the booze, and the Jews for the chance to do social justice.
Philadelphia, good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Brian. I want to give some kudos to your two guests because I am absolutely sick and tired of this incessant coverage of this traffic accident. People don't realize that 25,000 people a year die in the United States from drinking and driving, and this is just another accident that happened. And also, I want to make one comment about the criticism to the royal family. I'm not British or anything like that, but who of these people who are criticizing the royal family doesn't have a divorce in their family where they dislike at least one of their in-laws? Thank you.
Mr. Hitchens.
In case that was for me,
it was for either one.
It would indeed apply, but that isn't. But I will only say that that's not the basis of my criticism of the royal family.
Let me grab another call quickly.
I'm against the hereditary principle as the means of picking the head of state. So I would be against that even if they were all happily married and had managed to stay in touch.
Beverly Hills, California.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. I'm very happy to get on with Mr. Hitchens because I think he's phenomenal. But there is so much truth in the whole thing about how the coverage was done about Diana dying. It was a shame, but actually I think the TV has done just the same as the tabloids have done. They have created a monster. Every channel you turn to, same thing. And I thought it was a disgrace.
Why? Why though?
Same thing.
Why is it a disgrace?
When you've got like 45 channels and you hit all 45 channels, there was at least 16 channels hitting the same thing about how she had gotten into the accident, what was going on with her and the gentleman that she was with. I mean, quite honestly, I don't care. And it was a disgrace to even think that this was so much wanting to be heard. The same as O.J. I was quite disgusted with that.
Well, what would you say, though, to a news editor at a television network that says my ratings just went through the ceiling because we're talking about this?
Mr. Lamb, that's the problem with the ratings on television news. I would never even consider. I have 3 papers that I get. I would never take anything. There's nothing coming on about anything that goes on in the state of California about the things that are really important, except how the dog or a snake ate a dog, or you know, what's the weather is brought on there 15 minutes every time. There's no news coverage, and quite honestly, I guess they think that's what's making it. But there is one thing I'd like to ask Mr. Hitchens about the point of when he was talking about being an American citizen and how there isn't the people that are migrating to this country. When he's talking about these people with these nuns in California, are they actually citizens of the United States? I don't know. I don't understand how you can have a religious affiliation and yet not be a citizen of the United States. I don't know if they are or aren't, but I think that's very interesting. Thank you.
Let me ask Ms. Pridden to respond.
To answer your question, I don't know whether the nuns are citizens or not. The fact that they're, you know, Buddhist nuns have the right, just as much right as a Catholic nun, to be, you know, to participate in our political process. The things that struck me, though, is how no one has the people who normally get very exercised about the so-called Christian right getting involved in politics have not been disturbed at all. The fact that this is a religious group that's involving itself in a very big way in politics. There does seem to be a double standard here. If this were a vice president who had gone to a fundraiser at Jerry Falwell's church in Charlottesville, Virginia, this story would have been all over the top of the New York Times and the Washington Post and been all over the networks.
They still wouldn't have made the point that you don't make either. It sounds good when you say that Buddhist nuns, Catholic nuns, any religious outfit has the same right to participate in politics, but actually they have the same right to stay out of it, in my opinion, as long as they are granted tax exemption, which they currently are. I'm in favor of lifting that tax exemption and making all churches pay taxes, as I'm sure you are. But if they're not going to, then I think they have, the bargain is they stay out of politics and they honor the separation of church and state.
As I'm sure you are.
Well, I would be for lifting the tax exemption for church ventures into profit-making, like if they own office buildings or parking lots or something like that. I don't think the churches, certainly not for...
They should pay tax on their income.
I don't think that they should pay taxes on their collection plates.
Why would that be?
Well, it's because then that would let the government come in and have a say on what on their fundraising and on what they might say. I just think I think the First Amendment prevents that.
West Palm Beach, Florida, good morning.
Oh, yes, I'd just like to say I think the coverage of Princess Diana, and I'll call her that because I think she is, has been wonderful, and I get a little tired of our Republican side condemning anything that isn't sort of in their favor. But no, I think it's wonderful. The English people have responded to a person who has gone all over the world and tried to help people, and I think that's something we should all try to do. And as far as the nuns and the Christian right has spent billions of dollars trying to get people elected. They've sent out pamphlets. They speak terribly of our president. They call him terrible names, awful names if you listen to the radio, and Pat Robinson on TV. And I haven't heard anything disgusting or even close to that from these people from California. Thank you.
Mr. Pruden.
Well, I saw Mr. Hitchens flinch when he was, in effect, being accused of being a Republican, or at least a partisan of the
Big
Republicans, the Big R. Well, you know, I'm sure this lady expresses a point of view that's very widespread. It's, you know, the talk show expectations, the talk show mentality is very widespread out there. I don't, again, I just think that there is something wrong with a sense of proportion when a funeral for Diana Spencer, Princess Diana, becomes as big or maybe even bigger than the funeral for Winston Churchill. I mean, she's really not a heroine. She is a very pretty young woman, and it's certainly very sad that she was killed in this traffic accident. Again, it's entertainment. That's what has happened that I find so sad. This whole thing has taken on the spectacle of Entertainment Tonight. You know, what is there to say about it?
And otherwise, now perhaps you should change your thing on the screen so it doesn't say Democrats and Republicans, it says Royalists and Republicans should call them, because then we would get then I could own up to being a Republican without strain or misery.
I'm not a Republican either. You know, I have to honesty in labeling here. I'm an independent.
And nor are you a Royalist, I'm glad to see.
Well, I certainly enjoyed the wedding of Diana and Charles. I think I know in your Vanity Fair piece this month, you talk about your resentment of the idea that many Americans seem to have that the royal family is there as the star of a sort of a theme park that Britain is for the tourists, and I can certainly understand how you would feel resentful about that. I think that there is certainly some value in the monarchy as a tradition that holds the people together. However, I defer to the British people who know far more about that than I do. I do believe that it has value as a tradition. This royal family seems intent, however, on destroying whatever value it has.
Let me ask, though, something that our audience is out there saying, well, for an outfit that doesn't think that this ought to be talked about, we're talking about it for a whole hour, and for someone who doesn't like the royals, you make your living off of writing about the royals as you do here in Vanity Fair. What do you say to somebody like that?
Well, I actually don't make my living out of it by any means. I thought of writing an article a couple of months ago, and the magazine thought it was a good idea, saying why it was that the British royal family was all washed up. And perhaps you'd like to read a few of the amazing, almost eerily prescient paragraphs in that piece. Brian, it's still on the stands, by the way, available at fine news agencies everywhere.
Give us a paragraph that you remember.
Well, I say that for various reasons the royal family is going down the drain. One is the election of Tony Blair, who has been, as you noticed, the star of this week, because he was the man who coined the term People's Princess, pointed out that the royal family itself had no knowledge or understanding of the emotions or feelings of its subjects. I pointed out that had been going on for some time, the replacement of a monarchic by a presidential style. And then I said, people keep asking me, but doesn't the royal family provide magic and charisma? And I said, no, it doesn't. The only person with any magic and charisma, and I don't think she has that much of it, is an ex-member of the royal family. People don't understand. She did not die a member of the royal family. She'd been thrown out of that family. So the only person who can invoke it is someone who doesn't like the family. Now, I didn't know, of course, how apt that was going to sound in a couple of weeks, but the fact remains that has become the story this week.
Let's go to San Diego next. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Hi, thank you. My remarks really are geared towards both of your guests, but I think particularly towards Mr. Hitchens. I did see your appearance on MSNBC, and I really...
You watch too much television.
What's that?
You watch too much television.
Well, I'm on involuntary vacation.
Oh.
But I do agree with much of what you've said, because you were trying to get to the real issues. Cooler minds, unfortunately, weren't prevailing. But as I've noticed, as I've watched the coverage, the extensive coverage, and I do think it's gotten out of hand. I think that people are just going over the top, even for the Congress to pander to people and to make this a national day of recognition and mourning for her. I don't remember that happening for someone like John Dee. I just think that part is absolutely ridiculous. However, something that I'm not a feminist, but I've noticed that on a lot of the coverage, most of the male guests are male, and it seems to me that they've almost had this attitude towards the women callers who have clearly identified with Princess Diana for whatever reason, that they roll their eyes for the most part and just cannot understand when JFK or RFK, those memories and of their assassinations or their tragic, untimely deaths are invoked, and they say, oh, please, she was no JFK. And when I kind of step back and I look at those two individuals and I see how they were in a privileged family and in a privileged position and were untimely killed or died, and the reaction that many people had, I really don't see much of a difference. She obviously had an impact, and if you look at it from that point, when people say she was a hero to me, and again, it's primarily women, and they see themselves in their own struggles in her life, I do think that it's somewhat diminishing perhaps some of the value that is there for so many people. Maybe it's a mass hysteria, but I think the real tragedy is for any child who loses a parent. That, I think, is the real tragedy.
Thanks.
Well, it's, I don't understand how women here can think that they feel any identification with Diana Spencer. Here was and I saw a sentiment like this expressed all week at some of these TV interviews at the British Embassy, for instance, where young women are saying, I really identify with Diana. She and I were the same age. We married the same year, one of them said. But here's a young woman who had been to Saint-Tropez on a vacation. She flew in a private jet to Paris. had a dinner that probably cost more than a lot of people make in a month.
By the way, incognito at the Paris Ritz as well.
Gets into a $150,000 limousine and speeds off into the night, expecting to spend the rest of the weekend in the kind of apartment that very few people will ever even see, much less live in. I really don't understand how they feel any identification with her.
But I think the caller has a point, though, about the Kennedy comparison.
In impact.
The fact is there are, not because a lot of the alleged charisma of the Kennedys is transferred onto members of the Kennedy family who've never done a thing, not even get shot. Like young John, for example. I mean, he's considered to be Kennedy royalty for no other reason except his surname. And perhaps, I suppose, those who remember the salute at the funeral, but that again is something he came by, so to speak, by accident. So there is, I mean, there is an extent to which being a fan of Princess Diana is no worse than, shall we say, the canonization or deification
I agree with that.
Other politicized public figures. I just wanted to say something about what I mean by my resentment of the identification in this country of Britain with royalty, as if we have nothing else to offer as a culture, the country of my birth. The great contribution of the English, anyway, to the world is English literature and language, and that language and that literature is, in fact, in its tradition, quite extensively republican and democratic. I mean, Blake, Milton, Shelley, many, many other great writers, in poetry and prose, have been against the idea that Britain is a feudal or monarchic system. And one of the great aspects of that tradition is represented by the name Thomas Paine, who is the moral author of your Declaration of Independence. So it always strikes me, in fact, one of the great triumphs of the English Republican movement, if you like, is the American Declaration of Independence. So it's always struck me as rather bizarre that there's this cult in the United States of English royalism, just the sort of thing that I left England to get away from.
To the point of a caller in San Diego, you ought to know that the Associated Press story that's in a lot of papers, including the Washington Times, that has the headline, Diana's week-long wake is too much for some. Every person quoted in there is a man. And we get to some of those quotes. And one of them is, haven't we had enough, asked Birmingham bond dealer Paul Randall, entering the Royal Automobile Club with a furled umbrella on his arm and a copy of the Financial Times protruding from his grain leather attaché case.
You know, it is curious. Also, it struck me as interesting that the networks, which have been very hard on the royal family this week, actually owe the family a debt, because by delaying the funeral for a week, which struck me as quite a long delay, this allowed the story to build and allowed them to use everything for their ratings all week. I'm just curious, Mr. Hitchens, maybe you know, isn't this a long time between a death and a funeral, or is this traditional for the royals?
You're asking the wrong person. I don't know what's usual about this, and it contrasts very abruptly, of course, with the very hasty interment on Muslim principles of Dirty 05, because Muslim law says you have to be underground by the following sundown.
Kansas City, Missouri.
Can I just make a point about the ratings?
Yeah, sure. Hold on, Kansas City, we'll be right with you.
I mean, it seems to me that if you're a television executive, you are entitled to say, look, do because the public likes them. We did this for the ratings. We ran this show because ratings were good and so on. But you can't do that with the news division. You can't say the news division is done by ratings, because news is telling people what they don't already know. So you cannot find out that you're giving them what they like in advance, because you can't know it. You can't know what their reaction is going to be. It's just antithetical to news. That's the first point. In fact, they could have covered a lot of Princess Diana. They could have given any fan of hers as much coverage as he or she could possibly have wanted. But they needn't have made the assumption that that's all we wanted. And they needn't have made the assumption that we all felt the same way about it.
The Wall Street Journal...
And all took it as seriously. And that was offensive, and it made it seem as if we lived in a one-party state.
That Wall Street Journal editorial from Wednesday I was reading earlier says there are no brakes on the vehicles that TV drives, and it careened into the biggest crash since the O.J. Simpson trial. Turn it off at mid-morning and go off to get on with your life, and when you returned in the evening, it was still there on the local or national news. In New York, for example, we witnessed interviews before piles of flowers at the British consulate with women choking out that, quote, her life was all about peace, just like John Lennon's, and with spiky-haired, ear-ringed residents of the village suggesting that a fitting memorial would be, quote, if we all did something for charity, unquote. And, of course, each segment must end at all levels of the TV hierarchy with the reporter's voice soft as an angel's, adding that, quote, we all share, unquote, this or that or whatever.
Very well put. And you saw how many people actually signed the book at the British Consulate in New York this week? Guess. I just saw it this morning. 10,000, that's all. But you would believe the whole of New York was wound around that block.
Kansas City.
It's ridiculous.
Kansas City, you're on.
Yes, I have concerns. I wonder why you are trying to undermine what Diana did accomplish in a very short period of time. These other people that you are speaking about had a very long time to accomplish what they did accomplish, and they had the support of a lot of different people. Diana had to do it all alone. She didn't have the support of her royal family, and she did it. She made a difference. And I don't know why you insist on undermining and putting down what she did accomplish. We have no idea what she could have accomplished in her entire lifetime. And yes, I think she did a lot for humanity and for humankind. And I do appreciate the coverage because it brought that to the attention of everybody rather than the negative that always seems to prevail the news.
Okay, stay where you are just a moment. Let's get our reaction. We'll get you to come back.
Well, you know, this has allowed everybody to project their own interpretation of what Diana, Princess Diana, was. She did, I suppose you could say that she brought attention to the issue of landmines, and she hugged AIDS patients, which is fine. People who need hugs should get hugs, I suppose. But Diana Spencer did not accomplish very much. She was not a government official. She didn't do nearly the work that some other people have done who get no recognition. She was famous mostly for being famous. She wore clothes very well. As a man, I loved looking at her. But beyond that, what did she accomplish?
Let's go back to our caller and we'll come to Mr. Hitchens. Go ahead, caller. Respond, please.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. If you had watched the news coverage, you would have seen what Diana has accomplished in a very short amount of time. She raised a lot of money for a lot of different charities. She was a goodwill ambassador to a lot of different countries, including the United States. She was here several times on goodwill missions. So you absolutely cannot deny that she had accomplished a lot. And that is one reason I am glad that there was this coverage, so people like you cannot take that away from her.
Thank you. Mr. Hitchens.
Well, look, it's, you can't argue with or quarrel with faith, and you can't tell someone who's in love that they're not. These things are unquantifiable. People who believe that she did a lot and contributed a lot and made a difference and so on are obviously stuck with that belief. I don't think I know of a single celebrity who doesn't have a signature charity, for example. I mean, it's part of being a celebrity. You do your charity work. With some celebrities, it looks more like an accessory than it does with others. With her, it didn't look like an accessory. I mean, she could go from being the woman who did the gold-digging divorce settlement in which she asked, among other things, for a private plane and got 2 palaces and £600 million in cash, to one photo op in Angola, and people would remember the photo op in Angola. Now, her dowdy, boring former sister-in-law, Princess Anne, who's been the patron of the Save the Children Fund for, I think, 25 years now, goes trudging around Africa, looking like a fright in her boots and so on, up to here in mud and so on, all the time, covered in flies and so on, doing the Save the Children. No one cares. No one bothers to send a camera after her. She's not photogenic, for one thing. She's a boring frump. But she really is a spade-work charity worker. The fact is, nobody can really tell you what Princess Diana actually did. But if they believe that she did it, in a sense, she did do. But it's exactly that confusion, what Daniel Boston in his book on the non-event says, being well-known for being well-known, that one hopes doesn't become the only value in the selection of news priorities. That's all.
Nashville.
We're not trying to rain on your parade, ma'am.
Nashville, go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to say that I honor the memory of Diana, the Princess of Wales. And frankly, Brian, I'm appalled at your guest this morning, and I would like to say further that there are two kinds of paparazzi, or these photographers that chase celebrities on motorcycles and cars. They're the kind that you have there this morning, that all they do is sit and malign and criticize and try to defame someone's honor and memory. And I want to tell you something else, Brian. There's something more in life than just criticizing and maligning. I honor Diana because she hugged a sick child, because she did take the hand of someone who was dying with AIDS. I'm glad she was there to do it. I honor her memory, and I didn't know her, and I probably would never get to meet her. But I think she was a wonderful person. I think her memory is going to live on, and I'm disgusted by the comments of Mr. Pruden and Mr. Hitchens. And Mr. Hitchens, I've got something to tell you. You're in this country criticizing the royals. That's very easy to do. I would like to see you go back to England and criticize them over there.
Oh, please.
That's not so brave.
That's easy. I think I can meet all your objections. As you see, someone whose voice shows borderline hysteric. And not only that, she's had a whole week where everything on every inch of airtime, if you can have inches of time, every moment of airtime has been set up to suit people like her, moist, semi-tearful. And she sees two people for a few moments who don't agree, and she's in a state about it. She can't take even that. This is the sort of cheap emotion on which the thing's been based. It's exactly what we're objecting to. As for the demand that I should go back home to say this, I say it all the time in England. I published a book there, a critique of the monarchy, saying it's time for it to fold its tents and go, which wasn't a popular book when it came out. It's got more popular since, you may be glad to hear, ma'am.
Let me ask our caller in Nashville, ma'am, Mr. Hitchens just said that you are the way you are because you've been subject to all this coverage. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction to Mr. Hitchens and Mr. Pruden, and yourself, Brian, I'm a human being, and I have a great deal of respect for other human beings that try to do something to help people in whatever way they can. And I know that this young person of 36 years did as much as she possibly could within her status. I know of people that can do so much more and do nothing except write articles criticizing and maligning people. Mr. Pruden said something about an automobile accident. Indeed. I hope, Mr. Pruden, you're never in an automobile accident in that manner.
Well, I appreciate that.
She sounds as if she really means she hopes you're not as well.
Your reaction?
Well, of course. And ma'am, I hope you're never in an automobile accident.
For whatever that may have to do with it.
You know, and one piece of advice I could give you is stay out of cars driven by mad drunk men. Of course, I have said at the top of the show that I regret the death of Diana Spencer, the Princess of Wales. I think she did do some good things. It's the excess of coverage that we're talking about here this morning. We're not talking about whether it is a sad occasion that a beautiful young woman died in an automobile accident. Of course it is. But it's the excess of coverage, and I also say that my own newspaper has perhaps been guilty of it as well. There are more things going on that are more important than this outpouring of hysteria over a young woman, the death of a young woman that we all regret.
By the way, there are a lot of faxes coming in on this, very strong opinions on both sides. Here's one of them. It says, thank you for having Christopher Hitchens and Wes Pruden on. This proves that at least two members of the media have their heads screwed on straight and have not been caught up in the grand delusion and maudlin wallow that the TV media has created. Made for TV, indeed. Thanks again. One thing in Diana's favor, this comes from Dan Valentine of Philadelphia. She was, or appeared to be, intelligent and sophisticated. American culture seems to revel in the exact opposite. In music, lots of swearing, revealing clothing. TV and movie stars always talking about themselves and their sex lives. Sports figures, lots of trash talk, I'm the greatest, etc. The only intelligent people in popular culture are the bad guys in movies, and they end up dead. Here is one that says, we are all human beings, none of us are saints. Editor Prudence, stop dismissing Diana as a pretty bit of fluff. Want to comment quickly?
Well, I think she was very pretty.
If none of us are saints, then stop canonizing Princess Diana. They can't have it both ways.
Here's from David Hannes, Esquire of Coral Springs, Florida. Gentlemen, will none of you recognize the similarities with JFK's death and Jackie O's successful marriage into the Hitchens characterization of the international white trash jet set?
How's that again?
Will none of you, let me read it again, will none of you recognize the similarities with JFK's death and Jackie O's successful marriage into the Hitchens characterization of the international white trash jet set?
It's not grammatical, that question. I don't fully understand it. I see there's a vague association of ideas.
Well, on that note, we'll go to Naples, Florida. Good morning.
Morning, Brian. How you doing?
I'm fine, sir. What's on your mind?
I tend to agree with your, I tend to agree. I've had the same feeling that this has been overcovered, and so I've tried to follow the news details of it, of what actually happened in the crash, so forth and so on. But I guess I'm just wondering why your guests are having to get so personal, Why?
In what way?
They started out talking about the excess coverage of the tragedy. Okay, that's fine. But then they go on and say, Princess Diana, she's just a pretty face. She's just this. She's just that.
Why do you think?
Why do you have to get personal about it?
Well, let me ask you this. Why do you think people, obviously, just listening this morning, feel...
He wants impersonal coverage of Princess Diana.
But they feel... Why do people feel...
I'm sorry, what did Mr. Hitchens...
I said you seem to be wanting impersonal coverage of Princess Diana. I wish you all the luck in the world. What is there to discuss except a personality here? That's what we're saying.
Why do you have to sit there and look down your nose and criticize?
Do you want me to make it really simple for you? Because the story is entirely about a personality. If you want impersonal coverage, you are doomed to disappointment. We have two objections, or I do. One is it's too much coverage of any personality. Second, insofar as this personality is the centerpiece of Titanic coverage, I would say it's a rather meager personality, a not very distinguished life, and a not very important human being.
Caller, come back.
So then go after the press for doing those things instead of going after...
Well, I think I can look you in the eye, if I can see you back, and say that I have done that all morning.
And
you're a hard person to please, sir.
You've also gone after her personally.
That too, yes, both things.
Let me ask Mr. Pruden to jump in. Hold on
contradiction.
What's your reaction to the criticism?
Well, of course it's personal. We're talking about a person. I don't think that that our criticism has been that Diana's prince or the Princess of Wales is a bad person. I think we both agree that she was probably a good person. And I will say that she did some very good things. It's just that the comparison of this young woman who lived a jet-set life, and that's the life she wanted, to compare her to someone who has really had a lifetime of accomplishment, to my mind, is preposterous. If that makes me seem cold and unfeeling, I don't mean for it to, but I'll take that chance.
Caller? Naples?
Yes, sir.
Your response?
I don't know. I've just been sitting here all hour, and I mean, some of the comments just have seemed totally unnecessary.
Let me ask you this, because I'll go back to the Wall Street Journal editorial, that I haven't read the whole thing, but a lot of it, and there seems to be a great deal of difference between the way people think. And they're looking at the media story here, and here's what they said. It is an odd and frustrating experience, surely shared by viewers everywhere. You come into the event looking mainly for information and perspective, and eventually, unavoidably, inevitably, you emerge from your time before the screen a cynic, even in the face of death. Oh yes, the common answer to all this, one simply can choose not to watch. We guess so, but the fact is that this is a world we live in, and we can't escape the conclusion that a great technology is a terrible thing to waste. Fundamentally, this is the same lens-based technology that rode aboard the tiny Pathfinder as it traversed Mars, sending back wondrous images, the same technology that has turned the tensions of athletic competition into an entirely justifiable viewer addiction. What is your response to that take on this whole story?
That's an easy one, Brian. You have to be selective. You have to watch shows like yours. You pick out what... Yes, we do have all this media thrown at us. You select the ones you want to watch. That's why I'm sitting here watching C-SPAN this morning.
And kind of complaining that we've changed the subject.
Let's go to San Francisco. Go ahead, San Francisco. You're on the line.
Yes. I've been watching the coverage in the media very carefully this week, and it's quite fascinating to see the power of the image that can be built by the media in creating in the masses of humanity an idea about what a person is really like. When I see the coverage of the royal family, and particularly focused on Prince Charles and his two sons, and what is said about Diana, it's very strange that when they point out Charles's adultery and his misdeeds, they seem to clearly overlook Diana's embarrassing behavior, her flagrant adultery, and the effect that that has on her sons. When they make her a heroine to young women throughout the world, surely they must realize that some of the things that she's done has been a great embarrassment and not an example for the young women of the world. So when I'm looking at, I look at what's been said about Diana being, like a naive young woman coming into the royal family. She's a Spencer. What I heard was, even through the media, that the Spencers had been mistresses to the royal family for centuries. So my point is not that Diana is a bad person, but this madness. We have problems with promiscuity with young women in America. Why is this particular woman, who in many ways has really turned the whole world against her own country, and in some circles may even be considered treasonous, why is she being elevated to the point of almost some type of goddess? This seems like madness.
Why do you think, caller?
Well, I think that there are some factions in the world that would like to see all monarchies done away with, and I'm not debating that issue. But there may be some other sinister things that are under the table. But whatever is happening, people ought to stop this madness and clearly look and judge people fairly. Don't just jam the royal family and Prince Charles and overlook some of the indiscretions of Diana, because that's not justice, that's imbalance.
Thanks, caller. Mr. Hitchens?
Well, yes, there are some people who think that all the royal houses should be done away with, and I'm certainly one of them. And I find it odd that I should have to argue this in an America that's based on a rebellion against the terrible Hanoverians. Princess Diana, as you say, was a voluntary member of that dynasty. She didn't have to be in it. She joined it. She didn't behave very well in it. She was a spoiled kid. She didn't realize that there was more to it than just being the fairy tale princess. She rebelled against the idea that you have to sacrifice anything for duty or tradition, an idea that her rather gloomy husband certainly overdid, but nonetheless that he does possess a sense of responsibility. She thought, surely this means if you're a princess, life is a party. When she came to America, she could have met anyone she liked. They said, who do you want to meet? She said, John Travolta. That was as princess. She'd never read a book from beginning to end. She's a borderline airhead, in fact, was a borderline airhead, gold digger, a tremendous gold digger with a sharp lawyer, did a tremendous job of cashing in on her own divorce, did, in return for this, 1 day in Bosnia, 1 day in Angola, and was very nice to a person who was actually a friend of mine, Adrian Ward Jackson, when he was dying of AIDS, when the royal family told him maybe AIDS wasn't the right cause. I'll give her all that, but that's all she wrote, that's it. And the most abysmal taste in men. Some of them, as the caller says, married to other women whose lives were made miserable by the princess. So, and the guy she was actually trying to get off with when his bodyguards, and imagine the sort of people who are bodyguards for the Al Fayed family and the Paris Ritz Hotel, where the Fayed family has boasted of buying British parliamentarians and bribing and blackmailing them in the last few months alone. Imagine the sort of characters you're running with there. Her final choice of guy was perhaps the worst of all.
Well, I can't add much to that. You know, the thing, the idea that Diana was some vulnerable young woman who was being mistreated by the royal family, she was actually very clever, if not as intelligent as a lot of people think she may have been. And I have to think that this romance with Dodi Fayed might very well have been a strategy on her part. I can't believe that she did not know that she could not marry this man, because if she had, she probably would have turned the British people against her overnight, because of all kinds of political reasons why she couldn't marry him. She was the mother of a future king of England. She could not marry a Muslim man, to be very about it. And she knew that.
Well, the British law only says she can't marry a Catholic.
Well, I'm not talking about what the law is. I think the public...
The royal family is very broad-minded.
Well, but the British people would have been very... I think, I defer to your judgment on this, but I would think that they would find that was inappropriate, in the same way that when Jackie Kennedy married Onassis, she lost a lot of the luster and a lot of the glitter.
But not because he was Greek Orthodox.
No, because he was he did not strike most people as the kind of prince who should marry a princess.
I don't think that there would have been any really serious objection to her marrying a Muslim, but I think the Al Fayed family, the Al Fayed business dynasty, which has been found by British courts and investigators to be unfit really for the stewardship of public business. I mean, I'm putting it politely here, would have created a problem for her, yes, but she went into that absolutely with her eyes open. I mean,
got to get a call. We're running out of time. We've got to go to the House early today. Let's go to Cleveland next. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Thanks to C-SPAN, Hartford, Connecticut has been nicknamed Nashville, Tennessee. That woman called, not only lying to you, saying she was calling from Nashville, but she called earlier this week, so she should sort of be banned for life because she calls so often.
Yeah, we can't catch her, and it's a sad... I think, though, what she had to say is that... Which side did she take in this?
Oh, she was, as I recall, very pro-Diana.
Yeah,
she was choked up.
We need that this morning, so it was... But I appreciate what you're saying. I know she drives us crazy, and I'm sorry we can't catch her. Go ahead with your comments, because we're running out of time.
Well, what I wanted to say was that this thing comes down to the fact that she was killed by a drunk driver, period. There's nothing more you have to say. And we have had perhaps a year of television news hysteria about smoking. And yet people, something like 20,000 a year in America are killed by these drunk drivers, and none of them are volunteers except the drivers themselves. Whereas people who die from smoking-related illnesses are all volunteers. Now, you talk about, and by the way, finally they got around to nailing who they thought really caused this accident. I'm talking about our TV news people, and that is the tabloids. Oh, my God, those horrible tabloids. And even some of these news people in America finally got to blaming Rupert Murdoch, the Benoit of all television news. Oh, God, this evil man who caused all this to start with. I might mention two other things. I heard someone say Mozart died at the age of 36. I don't know if that's true or not. And as far as Diana and AIDS, personally, I'm just very saddened by this kind of a death, really. And I worry a lot about the children being thrust into this horrible family. But anyway...
Gonna have to run.
Let me say this about AIDS.
Quick.
In her interview with the BBC, she said that she took William and Harry to visit AIDS patients, but she told them it was cancer.
Thank you. We're out of trouble. Yeah, we're in trouble. We're out of trouble. Anyway, last comment before the House comes in.
Oh, I didn't know we were down to last comments.
Yes,
up the Republic. This has brought a republic much nearer, and so in the search for meaning in what is indeed only a sordid traffic accident, there may be an unintended consequence, and I think that's the ray of sunshine. That's the silver lining.
Young women of all ages should be very careful who they go out with.
Is that your last
comment? That's my last
comment. Daddy.
And that's our last comment for this Washington Journal on a Friday. Thank you for joining us. We're awaiting the arrival of someone in the House of Representatives, as you will see in just...
She was killed in a sordid traffic accident with a very sordid set of people, the international white trash jet set, into which she hoped to marry. Because no one wants to say that, because obviously the responsibility, as you say, is that of the driver. I mean, the driver going fast enough to get the Mercedes radiator into the front seat of the car. Picture the damage there, you know. But we can't say that it was the fault of her that the set she was running with, because that's not this week's story. It doesn't make her magical, it doesn't make her beautiful, it doesn't make her romantic.
Ask Wes Pruden about
As a result, the whole thing has been a wild goose chase. There are 7 members of my profession who would not be in jail if it wasn't for this ridiculous hysteria. I mean, the French police are simply scapegoating photographers.
But they're out now.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
But
the charges are still quite severe against them.
You had this piece in your Wednesday paper. Children hooked on TV stimulus find school. I bring this story up. One of your own reporters reported this. Passive action destroys. The press is pretty well taken on the television medium. Can you blame an outfit like MS in rocketed from 20,000 to 1 million on Saturday night or whatever for seeing that this is a great story for their future?
Do I blame them?
Would you?
Would I have done it? I like to think I would not have, but then I'm not in television news. I did on TV news a long time ago. It's because I preferred the more serious print. It's perfectly understandable why they do it, given the way television news is. But it is, you know, I guess it was Richard Nixon who once said that television is to news what a bumper sticker is to philosophy. It's all built on sensation. It's all built on image. And that's what I meant by the Oprah Winfrey-ification of news this week. All television news wants now is, as the Wall Street Journal says, cheap sentiment.
Venerable CBS program 60 Minutes would devote its entire hour to the subject. But you knew that you had stumbled into a world unique to television when the program ended with Dan Rather reciting a eulogy that rose rapidly into the ethers, his voice breaking, eyes welling, and promising more direct London the next night. Perhaps the event's most unintended moment of apotheosis, in which all the moons and age of celebrity came into perfect alignment, occurred on ABC's venerable Sunday morning program, from which David Brinkley had the good fortune to retire before this moment arrived, when Sam Donaldson himself announced that Barbara Walters would deliver her thoughts, quote, from Southampton, unquote. In Southampton, Miss Walters appeared to in a study, its wall lined with books, causing an observer of our acquaintance in one American living room to remark, "It's fake." To be sure, it's all quite obviously fake, though the grim deaths in a tunnel and the sympathy they evoke are all too real. Normal human sympathy for the misfortune of others is not a complex human emotion, as at a wake or in a personal phone call, as a simple, direct expression of concern and support. The hard part is in knowing when to give what one can and when to expect to pull back. Let me just stop there and get your response.
Well, that's, you know, I could have written that. Because they certainly expresses my sentiments. Look, what we had from the very beginning, the coverage, was everybody wanting to get a piece of Diana. Like the young man at the British Embassy said she was a role model. We had John Travolta saying, I want that family for those kids. I'll stop whatever I'm doing and fly over on a moment's notice. I suppose, you know, he thinks maybe this week they'd like to have disco dancing. Tom Cruise was talking about, I've been in that tunnel. I've been chased by paparazzi in that tunnel. Had a lot of people who maybe saw Diana drive down the street in a limousine trying to say, you know, great friends with her, because everybody wanted to somehow get in on this Oprah Winfrey free-for-all.
Festival of absolute solipsism, exactly. And
here's the Economist magazine cover, just came in, The Tragedy of Diana.
Yeah, and everyone calling her very sinister when this vicarious identification goes so far. You were even...
was a lovely, beautiful woman. What's also very interesting about this is that she was, what we've had a demonstration of this week is how sad everybody is when a beautiful woman dies like this. If she had been Mother Teresa, say, who really has accomplished something and has done something for the world, there would have been much outpouring of this. But because she is so beautiful, you know, people responded in a different way. I was enraged the first night because, enraged may be too strong a word, but the first coverage was the paparazzi chased them to their death. Now, I make no defense of the paparazzi. They're, you know, they're are people who are unfeeling and unsentimental and all that. But here was a man who was, even if he was stone cold sober, he was driving in a suicidal manner at 100 miles an hour or whatever in a tunnel, absolutely asking for an accident. Where was Doty? He, you know, supposed to be so greatly in love with this woman. Why didn't he just lean forward and say, hey, for God's sake, slow down? I think any man owes that responsibility to any woman that he has in his care.
Let me just throw this in. There's a column in the New Republic, the new issue coming out today, The Feast of Diana by William Powers. This is the New Republic. And it's just one little paragraph here. He says, Katharine Graham, who publishes the Washington Post and Newsweek, announced that the paparazzi are not, in fact, members of the press. Informed of Mrs. Graham's remark, a paparazzo on another show pointed out that a perusal of Newsweek's pages would surely turn up fine examples of his profession's handiwork.
Yes, I saw Mrs. Graham say that, and I rather flinched because it was all part of the appalling self-flagellation and masochism of the profession this week. The fact is, there's a sinister side to this mass hysteria and mass sentimentality. It's not just what I was describing it as, sickly and drooling. It can be mean too, because it has a search for blame, which is part of the search for meaning in an essentially meaningless event. People want to be able to attribute responsibility. Now, if Princess Diana had trodden on a landmine, which I think would have been a very fine way for her to go, then we could say, in a sense, her life and death had some meaning. As it happened,
give people just nothing but sentiment, and let the facts be damned.
Well, are we sure those ratings are holding up, by the way? I mean,
probably
maybe I move in the wrong circles, but I don't. I mean, I walk around Washington a lot. I don't see people in tears or queuing up at the British Embassy or any of this kind of thing. Have you been to the British Embassy? I did go, yes. I saw some people who obviously in need of some kind of there. But if I saw this guy, he was a boy, about 25, slightly overweight, putting down his flowers, his cards and so on. They stopped him, asked him, you know, what did she mean to you? And he said, she was my role model, my very strong role model. Now, the cameraman, the interviewer, instead of saying, what do you mean role? What do you mean model? What are you talking about? Just nodded sympathetically and understandingly as if, yes, of course, that's just how we all feel. What is this? What? It's like living in a one-party state, a banana republic, when the dear leader dies. You're compelled, you're counted in. Now, as a matter of fact, everywhere else I've been in Washington this week, people have been completely dry-eyed. So, sure that everyone wants to be treated in this way, as a cretin, in other words, by the mass media. It's one thing to cover it, it's another to be part of the story and assume that we're all extras in it.
In about 5 minutes, we'll go to the calls, and we have some calls to suggest that their folks don't think the way you all do at this table, so we'll look forward to hearing, or even to our raising the questions. But let me show you an editorial that's probably the strongest. There have been a bunch this week. You had one times. This is in the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, and I wanted to read just a little bit of it to show you how strong the animus is toward the television business from the print side. Is it possible that there is any more normal person out there who by now is not grossed out and sickened by television's coverage of Princess Diana's death? It is remarkable to see a professional mindset that studiously reports the sins of the tabloids and the paparazzi, even as it shoves its own sump pumps deep into Lady Diana and runs the open hoses onto the nation's living room floors. Yes, this is in every sense of the word, and surely a major news event by whatever standards currently apply. So it is no surprise that the
Washington Journal continues.
We've always wanted to get Wes Pruden and Christopher Hitchens together, one from the right, one from the left. Had no idea they would come together at this particular moment. We might find an interesting result. So we'll start with you, Mr. Hitchens, and look at the front page of the Washington Times. The nuns admit shredding evidence is the lead story up here, but the continuing story of the week down here is royal family brings grief into public eye after much criticism. You've been on the telly, as they say, talking about this. What's your take at this point in the story?
If the top headline had referred to Mother Teresa's, been the perfect front page from my point of view. As it is, two of my least favorite forces, that's to say the lovers of Princess Diana and the lovers of the House of Windsor, are having a fight, so it couldn't be better. I wish that's how it had been reported. Only today did the thing begin to talk of a news story. I mean, in other words, something that could actually be reported. For the whole of the rest of this week, we've been absolutely just drowning in drool, where the coverage has not been the coverage, objective coverage of an event, but the sort of forced recruitment of everybody into the same emotional mold. A great titanic outpouring of kitsch, in other words, where everyone is told that they're all part of a great we, and that this great we feels both bound together and enormously moved and hurt by something that actually is a non-event.
Howard Kurtz, who writes for your competitor here in the Capitol, the Washington Post, has a story on Media Notes Extra. Read all about it. Over coverage shocks press.
Well, the press is probably easily shocked. Look, this has been one great Oprah Winfrey show this week, worldwide. And I have to say, as an Anglophile, that I'm really quite disappointed in Britain, where the tradition of the stiff upper lip has descended into, you know, something like this comes up, and everybody in London seems to want to get on the Oprah Winfrey show too.
Street therapy, yeah.
Exactly. Look, let me say first of all that I was sad too when I heard the news that Diana was dead. She's